Happy Halloween, my fellow geeks. It's Dan, and welcome back to Danotaz Media, and I'm super excited for today's video because in today's video, I am finally going to be showing off some of my manga collection. Now, I've mentioned before in both my Pokemon and my Chainsaw Man videos that I am a manga collector. However, I haven't really gotten around to doing much manga content on my channel since I started it. But recently, I actually just finished collecting all 25 volumes of Soul Eater, which is a manga series that I have been collecting for almost 2 years now. So, to celebrate, I thought, why not make a video showcasing some of my manga content? And since it's Halloween time, I thought, you know what? Might as well make it Halloween themed, since the supernatural genre of manga is one of my favorites and I have a bunch of them, and I can easily show them off and recommend some for all of you to check out. So without further ado, let's begin. So, Soul Eater is set in the Shinigami Technical High School for Weapon Meisters, who are warriors who fight alongside their demon weapon partners, who are beings with the ability to transform into various combat weapons that the Meisters can use in order to fight the forces of evil. Each demon weapon aims to collect the souls of 99 evil humans and 1 witch in order to promote to the rank of Death Scythe, in order to be fit to serve under the Shinigami himself, a Grim Reaper, Death. Though there are many different weapon meisters and demon weapons within the world of Soul Eater, the story primarily centers around 3 duo pairs of weapon meisters and their demon weapon partners. Maka Albarn and Soul Evans, Black Star and Tsubaki, along with Kid Death and his partners Liz and Patty Thompson. Right off the bat, one of the most notable things about Soul Eater as a series is the fact that it is Halloween themed, which is something I really gravitated towards since Halloween is my favorite holiday, which is also partially why I made this video Halloween themed in the first place. Now, aside from Soul Eater, there really aren't too many other anime or manga with very prominent Halloween themes within its plot points or storyline. But in this sense, it actually makes Soul Eater really unique since it's one of the few that does. As a manga series, Soul Eater lives and breathes Halloween, as Atsushi Okubo goes all out when infusing all the Halloween themes into the writing and the art. When writing Soul Eater, Okubo took a lot of influences from other Gothic-style creators such as J.K. Rowling and Tim Burton, and these influences are extremely evident upon reading the series. Soul Eater definitely has many Harry Potter influences. The Shinigami Technical High School was undoubtedly based off of Hogwarts, and you can tell that one of the main characters, Maka Albarn, was heavily influenced by Hermione Granger in every sense of the word. Everything from her design, as well as her witty and book-smart personality, draws so much inspiration from Hermione. And then you can see a lot of Tim Burton inspirations within Soul Eater's atmosphere and art style, as the backgrounds definitely feel like an illustrated version of The Nightmare Before Christmas, and many of the characters feel like they were stylized after characters from not just The Nightmare Before Christmas, but also other Tim Burton films such as Beetlejuice and Sleepy Hollow. But while the Halloween elements in Soul Eater are fun, for me what makes the series is its characters. Each of the characters has so much personality, and while they're all extremely different from each other, they all play off each other so well. For example, Maka Albarn is an extremely uptight, book-smart character, and yet her demon weapon partner, Soul Evans, is very laid back and rock and roll. And while their differences in personalities do lead them to butt heads, in the end, as the series goes on, you see that the two actually work really well together as a team, and you come to understand that they really are the perfect pair, as not only do they work well together, they also understand and know each other better than anyone else. And the same thing can be said for the other leads in the series. And this also applies to a bunch of the other characters within Soul Eater, such as Black Star and Tsubaki, and Kid Death and his partners Liz and Patty Thompson. Blackstar as a character is extremely energetic. He's very brash and immature, but he's partnered with Tsubaki, who's a very wise and polite young lady. And then you have Kid Death, who, while for the most part is very put together, he is extremely OCD. And he is partnered with Liz, who, despite being very responsible, is extremely squeamish and gets freaked out by most paranormal activity. And her sister, Patty, who most of the times has the personality of a little kid. And while you wouldn't think that these characters, based on their personalities, would get along very well, in reality, they're the only ones who pretty much can tolerate each other 24/7. Then, I've gotta say, I really like the comedy within Soul Eater. Soul Eater is actually a very surprisingly funny manga. There are a bunch of great gags, especially with Blackstar as well as Kid Death and Patty's characters. For example, one of the funniest gags regarding Blackstar's character is the fact that he idolizes the idea of being a ninja, and yet his personality is one of the most ill-fitted for the job, as he is a complete attention hog, both consciously and unconsciously. For example, there are these scenes where he'll do something like, say, ninjas are supposed to be sneaky and stealthy while he's trying to sneak attack someone, but he says it out loud, and so he pretty much outs himself since the person already knows that he's there. And as I mentioned before, Kid Death's character is extremely OCD, as he freaks out whenever anything doesn't have perfect symmetry. And one of the best ongoing gags within Soul Eater is seeing all the different things Liz and Patty do to sort of snap him out of those moments. And then I've gotta give Atsushi Okubo major props for Soul Eater's action. The action within Soul Eater is super cool, and that's largely due to how creative Okubo gets with drawing the fights and the action panels. It's really engaging and really hooks you in whenever there's a huge action scene or major plot development through the fight scenes. So if any of those details about Soul Eater seem appealing to you, I definitely recommend checking out the manga. It's one of the best things to read now during the Halloween season, since Halloween was such a heavy influence on the series. And it also should be pretty easy to find, since there's been a new wave of interest in Soul Eater after the ending of Okubo's other series, Fire Force, which revealed that the two were in the same universe. And because of that revelation, there's actually been a huge spike in Soul Eater sales. So the series should be pretty easy to find if you go to Barnes & Noble or other stores that sell manga. Now, Soul Eater does have an anime adaptation you guys can check out if you want. However, I'd recommend staying away from it since the anime is only faithful to the manga for the first half, and is also infamous for having one of the worst anime original endings of all time. Now, I'd personally recommend you guys buy the new re-release of Soul Eater, aka the Perfect Edition hardcover, since it's the most up-to-date version of the series and it'll be the easiest to find. You can check out the original volumes like the ones I have here. However, due to the re-release, these are going to be increasingly harder to find as time goes on. However, if you're still set on trying to find these original volumes of Soul Eater, I ain't gonna stop you. Now, I personally found this first volume of Soul Eater in store at a Barnes & Noble, and I loved it so much that the very next day I went back to Barnes & Noble to get more manga. But aside from that one volume, I bought the rest of these online. So the next series I've collected that I'm showing off in this video is Chainsaw Man by Tatsuki Fujimoto. Chainsaw Man was one of my favorite manga this year. The series is so good. So essentially the series follows this young man named Denji, and Denji lives in a world where people's fear can manifest as these bloodthirsty creatures called devils. So when Denji was really young, he went through something that no one should have to experience, as his father actually ended up committing suicide and leaving him with billions of dollars in debt to the Yakuza. And right when Denji is panicking, not knowing how in the world he's going to pay off this humongous debt to the Japanese mob, he meets one of these devils in the form of a dog. More specifically, the Chainsaw Devil, which he names Puchita. Over the years, he and Puchita become best friends, and they look out for each other during one of the worst periods of Denji's life. Denji's debt only increases, and it gets so bad to the point where he literally needs to start selling his own body parts. And right when you think that things couldn't get any worse, they do, as the Yakuza boss that he had been working under in order to pay off his debt actually ends up betraying and killing him. But as luck would have it, that wasn't the end of Denji's story, as Puchita actually ends up saving his life by merging with him and turning him into the new Chainsaw Devil. And right when Denji first manifests as Chainsaw Man, he ends up killing every single member of the Yakuza who betrayed him, which actually gets rid of his debt. And seemingly out of nowhere, he is approached by a woman and two men, who give him an ultimatum, which would be to be killed or join them in their Devil Hunter agency. And Denji, having just gotten his life back, of course chooses the latter, to join them in their Devil Hunter agency and fight off evil devils as the one and only Chainsaw Man. Now, one of the things that really surprised me when reading Chainsaw Man was how mature the series was. Being a shonen, I really wasn't expecting it to be all that deep, but let me tell you, I was incredibly wrong, because this manga has all the makings of a seinen. I'll put in a special amount of emphasis on the gore because this thing is loaded with blood. There is so much violence. And another thing I was really impressed by was how deep Chainsaw Man goes into the horror genre. Normally when it comes to genre blends, they tend to lean more towards one genre instead of the other. However, Chainsaw Man is like the perfect amalgamation of both action and horror. It has a lot of action, but the horror elements are just as essential. The horror elements in Chainsaw Man actually creeped me out way more than I thought it would, and I was also really glad to see that they never faded away as the series went on. In fact, they only became more prominent the deeper you got into the story. And even if horror isn't your forte, don't worry, as the series also has a bunch of really funny moments. For example, Denji is actually a pretty funny character, and then one of Chainsaw Man's other very prominent characters, Power, is absolutely hysterical. This character has zero filter and has the best gags of the entire manga. Much like Soul Eater, I would describe Chainsaw Man as another series where the characters really make the manga. However, unlike Soul Eater, I would warn readers not to get attached to the characters because no one is safe in Chainsaw Man, as the series is not afraid to kill off any of its main characters when it needs to, so it's something you might want to keep in mind while going in. And I've really got to applaud Tatsuki Fujimoto for not just his incredible writing, but also his phenomenal art within Chainsaw Man. Fujimoto draws his characters with very realistic body proportions. However, his style has a very sketchy feel to it, which actually adds a lot to the shading in the manga panels, which in turn actually adds a lot to the more horror-centric and grittier scenes within the manga. And then it's also worth noting that out of every series in my collection, Chainsaw Man is the only one I think actually has a really good anime adaptation. Even though it only just started coming out, so far it is really good. It is animated by MAPPA, who is the same animation studio that did Jujutsu Kaisen, Kakegurui, and the final season of Attack on Titan. And even though the art style isn't quite as good as what Fujimoto gives us in the manga, it's still pretty good, especially when it comes to the action, which is absolutely phenomenal. And even though I prefer the Japanese cast of the Chainsaw Man anime, for those who like dubs, Chainsaw Man actually has a really good English dub, and it's directed by Mike McFarland, who is one of my favorite dub directors and has done a bunch of phenomenal English dubs, including Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood, Attack on Titan, and Wolf Children. So the next series we're covering on this list is Tokyo Ghoul by Sui Ishida. Tokyo Ghoul takes place in a world really similar to our own, but with one exception, being that the society also includes man-eating people called ghouls. So, Tokyo Ghoul follows Ken Kaneki, who is a rather shy and introverted young man, until one day he gets asked out on a date by this girl, and everything's going well until he finds out that this girl is a ghoul, when she ends up attacking and almost killing him, when all of a sudden, a beanpole actually ends up landing on top of her, seemingly killing her, and Ken is left in very critical condition. He is rushed to the hospital, but as it turns out, the girl, the ghoul, was actually the same blood type as him. So the doctor ends up taking her organs and implanting them in Ken. And this ends up turning Ken Kaneki into a half ghoul, half human hybrid. I personally think Tokyo Ghoul is an amazing character study and does a very good job at really blurring the lines of morality. As the series shows you both sides of the spectrum, you get to see the perspectives of both the ghouls and the humans. The ghouls, while they do eat people, they're not inherently evil. They're just doing what they need to do to survive, because much like humans, if they don't eat, they will die of starvation. So they really aren't left with any choice but to consume human flesh. And the series also makes sure to show you the perspective of the humans who hate and fear the ghouls. And considering that ghouls are a race of beings who literally kill them, you can't really blame the humans for hunting and defending themselves against the ghouls. And in this way, I think Ken Kaneki serves as a really cool plot device, as he, being a half-human, half-ghoul hybrid, is the bridge between the two worlds, so he can see both sides of the spectrum equally and fairly. And I also felt that having him learn about how the ghouls operate and live in the world of humans alongside the audience was very interesting and very compelling. But even as we're diving into the world of the ghouls, we never lose sight of the human's perspective within Tokyo Ghoul's story. Because much like how Kaneki serves as our guide to the world of the ghouls, we also have another character, Kotaro Amon, who is a ghoul hunter, someone who kills and hunts ghouls for a living. And he sort of acts as our guide to the human side of the story. And while the humans do hunt and kill ghouls, even innocent ones, that doesn't necessarily make them bad people, because from an early age in the world of Tokyo Ghoul, they are taught to fear ghouls as these predators who would kill them on sight. So you really can't blame them, because from their perspective, if they don't eliminate the ghouls, they could possibly be facing extinction. So in this way, Tokyo Ghoul makes it clear that for the most part, there really aren't any clear good guys or bad guys within the story, which is a concept I find so interesting and incredibly clever. Now let's talk about the art. Now at the beginning of Tokyo Ghoul, I'll say that the art style is kind of generic, it doesn't really stand out too much. However, as the story goes on, Ishida really starts to develop his style, and let me tell you, he gets really good at the art. In fact, Ishida gets so good at drawing the manga panels that I would even go as far as to say that some of the panels are gorgeous enough to be shown at art galleries in museums. For those wondering, there is a Tokyo Ghoul anime. However, I strongly advise against watching it because the anime really does not do the story justice. Because not only does the Tokyo Ghoul anime take a bunch of liberties with the source material and go a completely separate route from the manga, it also heavily censored a lot of the mature content that it did adapt from the manga, which makes no sense to me since Tokyo Ghoul is a seinen manga. It is literally a manga that is written for adults. So the decision to censor the series doesn't make any sense since it wasn't even written for younger audiences in the first place. So now that I got that little rant about the anime out of the way, case in point, I recommend sticking to the manga. It's actually pretty easy to find. The manga volumes for Tokyo Ghoul are available in most stores that sell manga. I personally got all 14 volumes of my collection in an all-in-one deal on Amazon. But you can also find volumes of the series in stores like Barnes & Noble and also Right Stuff Anime online. So next up on this video of manga recommendations, we have the Death Note short stories. Now, some of you might be confused since I said that Chainsaw Man was the only manga here that had an anime worth checking out, considering how well known and popular the Death Note anime is. And when it comes to that point, I'll say that you are correct. Death Note does have an anime, and it is very good. However, this manga is the short story collection, and as far as to my knowledge, none of the stories within the manga, including Sekira, Akira, and the vignettes of L's life, have ever been adapted before into an anime. Now, the Death Note short stories are written by the exact same team who wrote the original Death Note manga, including author Sugumi Oba and artist Takashi Obata. And the manga is a compilation of a bunch of short stories that take place and expand the universe of Death Note. Much like how the original series followed Light Yagami, a teenager who receives a book called the Death Note, created by the Shinigami, aka the Death Gods of Japan, which allows him to kill people by writing their names down and envisioning their face. The short stories follow a whole bunch of other characters aside from Light who have also wielded Ryuk's Death Note at one point in time. Now, I personally love the art in this. Takashi Obata does a fantastic job doing the illustrations as always. And while it's not as long or complex as the original Death Note was, I honestly think the short stories are better for people who just want something small to read in their free time to entertain them when they're not doing anything. And I also think that the short story collection is also very good for people who maybe aren't that familiar with Death Note, as it does a pretty decent job explaining the lore. But I honestly would say that the short stories are even good for those who are familiar with Death Note and understand the universe, as they provide for great world building and universe expansion of the Death Note franchise. For those interested in the Death Note short stories, you can actually find this book at most bookstores, including those that don't have a huge selection of manga. For example, I actually got this volume of the Death Note short stories 20% off at Target. But I also know people who have found this particular copy of the Death Note short stories in similar stores such as Walmart. There we go. Moving on, we possibly have one of my favorite ongoing manga series currently right now, Undead Unluck. Now, this book is so underrated, and now, while I'll say that this book is probably the least Halloween themed although this book is probably the least Halloweeny out of anything in this video, I still felt that this series was a good fit for the video since the main characters are literally a zombie and a bad luck charm. So the premise of Undead Unluck essentially centers around this girl right here, Fuko, and the series opens with her about to commit suicide. As I mentioned before, she is bad luck. Her powers literally make it so that if she is in physical contact with anyone, she will immediately induce bad luck on them, which oftentimes leads to their deaths. But right as Fuko is about to kill herself by jumping off a bridge, she meets this guy named Andy, who, as we learn very quickly, is someone who cannot die, making him an immortal zombie. And though Andy's power literally lets him live forever, he's sort of sick of life. So when he finds Fuko, he kind of views her as the key to dying, as her bad luck could possibly end up leading to his demise. Which actually leads to a very interesting relationship between the two characters as the series goes on. Now, Undead Unluck is one of the most creative manga I've ever read. The way Yoshifumi Tozaka writes the characters is so genius because it manages to reach sort of like a middle point between a Dragon Ball style action series and a completely ridiculous, over-the-top sketch comedy like Konosuba. Undead Unluck has some very unique world building in the way it creates the power systems for the characters and also the way it builds on its universe. For example, each character's power is something that defies the natural order of like the world, which is exactly why all the code names to the characters have un in it. Like Andy is undead because he cannot die, and Fuko is unluck because she makes people super unlucky. And their powers actually provide for not only amazing action scenes, but also some really great comedy. The physical comedy within Undead Unluck is insane. Yoshifumi Tosaka literally gets super creative with all the different ways in which he can use the character's abilities for different comedic gags, which makes for an absolutely wonderful reading experience. I also think Undead Unluck has an extremely fun art style. As you can see, it's very My Hero Academia-esque. However, once you actually read the manga, you can see a lot of differences between the two styles, since the way Yoshifumi Tosaka draws the panels and the characters' movements is incredibly different from My Hero Academia. It's actually more akin to something like Tom and Jerry than the typical anime series. And like I said, this manga series is super easy to find. It's extremely popular, so you'll probably find it in most manga stores. I, for one, have gotten every volume in store at Barnes & Noble. Although there are only 9 volumes that have been published in English, as you can see here, the series is still ongoing, so you can expect even more volumes to come out in the near future. Now, the last 2 manga from my collection I recommend people check out for the Halloween season are Uzumaki and Shiver by Junji Ito. So for those who don't know who Junji Ito is, essentially Junji Ito is the Stephen King of comic books and manga. Junji Ito's work in horror manga are some of the most well-known and famous amongst all graphic novel horror fans. And even though I only have 2 of his books here in my manga collection, really any of his other works, including Tomie Gyo and all the other stuff he's written, would be great for Halloween reading. But since I do not have the physicals of the rest of Junji Ito's horror manga portfolio, let's just focus on the ones I do have, starting with Uzumaki. Now, Uzumaki is an extremely interesting premise, as it follows this girl named Kiri, who lives in a town that is cursed by spirals. And while that may sound bizarre, trust me, it is terrifying when you actually read it. Junji Ito comes up with such creative ways to make the spiral shape an absolutely terrifying concept. This book has everything, including but not limited to airbenders, human snails, vampires, cannibalism, and more. While Shiver, on the other hand, is a compilation of a bunch of the different horror short stories that Junji Ito has published in magazines over the years. One thing that's important to note about Junji Ito is that he is a mangaka that specializes in short stories. And this is a writing style that even transfers over to his manga that have an overarching plotline like Uzumaki, as you'll notice when you read the chapters that each one of them has a very episodic feel to it. And although they are essentially a compilation of short stories, they'll all come together to form one fully realized and fleshed out story. And it's this type of writing style that really differentiates him from other mangaka in Japan. But writing isn't the only way in which Junji Ito's manga stand out from the rest, as Junji Ito also has an extremely unique and recognizable art style. Each moment of horror within his work is drawn in excruciating detail to the point where it sends chills down your spine. He draws some of the most freaky creatures and characters that you will ever see imaginable. And even though all the horror imagery really makes you want to look away, it's drawn in such great detail and style that it just draws the eyes to the page, making it incredibly difficult to look away. Now, recently, Junji Ito's writing has seen a huge increase in popularity. Viz Media, Kodansha, and a bunch of other publishers have been going crazy publishing a bunch of his different works. So you'll probably be able to find at least one of his manga in any store that sells books. I personally got both Shiver and Uzumaki in stores at Barnes & Noble. But you can also find a bunch of his other works in online stores such as Right Stuff Anime and ABE Books. So that's the end of this video of manga series from my collection I think are great reads for Halloween. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to let me know in the comment section down below, and if you want to see more content like this, make sure to leave a like and hit the subscribe button in order to get even more videos like these from me and my channel. So with that out of the way, I will see you in the next video.